Cedar Creek Medical in Colorado Springs smells like antiseptic and burnt coffee, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead in that particular way that makes time feel like it's moving sideways. The ER hums with the usual rhythm, monitors beeping their mechanical heartbeat, the whoosh of automatic doors, the squeak of cart wheels on linoleum. Danielle Ross moves through it all like water finding the path of least resistance, her movements economical and precise, her navy scrubs faded from 100 washings. She restocks the trauma bay without being asked. 14-gauge angiocath needles in their tray. Sterile gauze packs. Endotracheal tubes arranged by size. Her hands move with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing exactly where everything belongs, from understanding that in the 90 seconds between a patient's arrival and the doctor's assessment, those 90 seconds are the difference between a save and a code. A nurse named Sarah watches from the supply room doorway. You don't have to do that, you know. That's technically. I know, Danielle says quietly. She doesn't look up. Her left hand trembles for exactly 1 second, muscle memory from something older, something she doesn't talk about, and she steadies it against the counter. The tremor stops. It always does. Sarah shifts her weight. There's something about Danielle that makes people unsure how to talk to her. Not unfriendly. Just present in a way that doesn't require anything from anyone else. You working a double? Sarah asks. Yeah. That's your 4th this month. Danielle doesn't answer. She finishes the trauma bay setup, runs through the mental checklist, intubation equipment, suction, central line kit, level 1 rapid infuser in case they need blood pushed fast. Everything is exactly where hands will reach for it without thinking, because thinking is a luxury they don't have when someone's bleeding out. She reaches under her scrubs, feels the stitching of the unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining against her ribs. Faded. The edge is worn from 18 months of touching it, checking that it's still there, that some part of her still exists underneath the quiet nurse who defers to doctors and never corrects anyone in public. The patch is the size of a postage stamp. It has the call sign of her unit stitched in thread that's nearly gone colorless, Reaper section, with a number beneath it. 6. She was Reaper 6. That person existed in another life, in a place where the sand was red and the sky looked like burnt rust, and making a decision took 3 seconds because hesitation got people killed. Now she's the nurse who restocks without being asked. Dr. Marcus Pierce arrives for his shift at 7 a.m., walking through the sliding doors with the kind of entrance that communicates his understanding that the room has improved by his presence. He's 43, educated at Johns Hopkins, chief of ER, the kind of doctor who introduces himself as doctor before he introduces himself as human. He carries a coffee from someplace expensive downtown, and his watch costs more than most of the nurses make in a month. He sees Danielle arranging the crash cart with the precision of someone who's done it exactly the same way 1,000 times, and his jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. You're prepping before attending rounds. His voice isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It has the kind of architectural quality that makes people listen, smooth, cold, constructed to project authority the way a building projects height. That's not your responsibility. Danielle looks up, meets his eyes for exactly 1 second, then back down to the equipment. It's ready if you need it. What I need, Pierce says, stepping closer, is for people to stay in their lanes. I'm sure you understand. He's smiling. It's the kind of smile that looks friendly to anyone not paying attention. Nurses who think their doctors make mistakes. And mistakes kill people. Sarah, who's still in the supply room doorway, freezes. Danielle's hands don't pause. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't explain that she already checked the equipment 3 times, that she knows exactly what she's doing, that her understanding of trauma protocols is probably more comprehensive than his is. Instead, she just nods once. Of course, doctor. Pierce walks away, and that smile stays on his face the whole time, like something surgically implanted. What he doesn't see is the way Danielle's breathing stays steady. What he doesn't understand is that she's been underestimated by people with more authority than he'll ever have, and she's survived things that would make his medical degree look like a participation trophy. What he doesn't know is that the reason she never corrects the doctors is not because she's unsure of herself. It's because she's choosing not to. The hours unspool in that particular way hospital hours do, long and compressed at the same time. Danielle works through her shift with the kind of efficiency that doesn't announce itself. She's here to help. She's here to ease suffering. She's here to keep people alive through the spaces between one moment and the next. At 2 p.m., a 74-year-old man comes in with chest pain that's not chest pain, it's his appendix, inflamed, radiating like referred pain in his sternum. Danielle reads it in the way he's holding his stomach, the way his pupils dilate, the slight hardness of his abdomen under her hand when she assesses him. She says nothing to Pierce, who's already ordered an EKG and is preparing to admit him for observation based on the heart attack presentation. She just asks the patient, "How long has your right side been bothering you?" He looks at her like she's the first person who asked the right question. "Since about 3 this morning." She documents it. She doesn't undermine the doctor. She just makes sure the information is visible. An hour later, when the surgeon runs the ultrasound, they find an appendix that's starting to perforate. The surgery happens because Danielle left a breadcrumb. Pierce never notices. By the time evening shift arrives, Danielle has been awake for 18 hours. Her hands are steady. Her eyes are clear. There's a quality to her presence that makes people trust her instinctively, the kind of trust that comes not from credentials on a wall but from the invisible authority of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and has made peace with the weight of it. She's sitting in the break room at 6 p.m., eating a turkey sandwich and staring at nothing in particular, when she overhears Pierce talking to another resident in the hallway just outside the door. His voice carries easily through the gap in the frame. "We have some nurses," he's saying, "who've developed what I call savior complex. They see a few critical patients and suddenly they think they understand medicine. We have to be careful about that. Especially the quiet ones. The quiet ones are the most dangerous." The other resident laughs. It's the kind of laugh that signals agreement, that transforms mockery into bonding. Danielle doesn't move. She doesn't even stop chewing. But her hand reaches down and touches the unit patch through her scrubs, through her jacket lining, and for exactly 3 seconds, the tremor comes back, not from fear. Not from doubt. From the kind of restraint that costs everything to maintain. The thing about being underestimated is that it's a weapon if you know how to use it. Danielle knows how to use it. She's been using it her entire career at Cedar Creek Medical, letting Pierce build his narrative about her incompetence, about her overstepping, about the nurse who doesn't know her place. She lets him spread his quiet mockery through the break room like spilled coffee, lets the story of her dangerous delusions become part of the ER's folklore. And she keeps working doubles. She keeps prepping trauma bays at 3 in the morning when nobody's watching. She keeps her unit patch sewn against her ribs like a secret heartbeat, like the only evidence that somewhere underneath the nurse uniform, under the deference and the silence and the careful way she says, "Of course, doctor, there's still someone else. Someone who's seen the worst that human beings can do to each other. Someone who's held pressure on wounds while helicopters roared overhead. Someone who's made decisions that saved lives and someone who knows the exact weight of responsibility that comes with knowing you might be the difference between alive and dead." But that knowledge stays hidden. The question isn't whether Pierce sees it. The question is what happens when someone arrives at Cedar Creek Medical who does. The CR-17 Globemaster touched down at Peterson Space Force Base at 05 for 7 hours, and by 06:12, the General was through Cedar Creek Medical's trauma bay doors on a stretcher still bearing the dust of Kandahar. 7 bullet wounds. 1 through the shoulder that had nicked the subclavian artery. 1 lodged against the spine. 2 in the abdomen. 1 catastrophic wound to the right thigh where the femoral artery had nearly severed completely. The flight surgeon's report was terse, stable for transport. Barely. His family had arrived 20 minutes before the aircraft landed, his wife Claire, 2 adult daughters, his sister. They'd been waiting in the surgical family lounge when the ambulance pulled up, and now they followed the stretcher down the hallway with the particular helplessness of people who loved someone broken. Claire's hand was at her mouth. One daughter was already crying. The general's eyes were closed, his breathing the mechanical rhythm of a ventilator, his skin the color of old paper. Danielle had been waiting. She'd clocked in at 0530, pulled up the manifest from Peterson, cross-referenced the arrival time with her encrypted phone, and moved. Trauma Bay 4. The one with the best imaging access, the cleanest line to the OR, the suction that didn't whine. She'd started laying out supplies at 0545, prepping for a casualty with specific wound patterns that didn't match the official report. The official report said a Taliban ambush. The encrypted message she'd received at 0200 had said something else entirely, a friendly fire situation at a forward operating base, 3 intelligence operatives down, 1 general, civilian evacuation protocol, national security decision directive clearance, eyes only. The general was carrying classified intelligence. She was here to make sure he lived long enough to deliver it. By 0610, Danielle had already started 2 large-bore 4 lines with 14-gauge angiocath needles, hung 2 units of O-negative blood on the rapid warmer, and laid out a full thoracotomy set on a separate instrument tray. She'd positioned the defibrillator pads, checked the crash cart medications, 1 mg epinephrine, 500 mg amiodarone, all timed and dosed for a high-acuity trauma, and marked the surgical approach lines on the defibrillator pads with a grease pencil. She'd done this before. Not in this hospital. Not in this lifetime, according to the paperwork on file. But her hands knew the choreography. Muscle memory was the most honest part of a person. The stretcher rolled through the trauma bay doors at 0613. Dr. Pierce arrived at 0615, still buttoning his shirt, his hair wet from a shower, his expression already irritated at being called in early for what he probably assumed was routine. He saw the prep bay. He saw the 4s already running. He saw the 3 units of blood, the suction catheter positioned, the instruments arranged in the precise sequence they would be needed. He saw Danielle standing at the bedside, her gloved hand steady, her posture already in the frame of the next 20 minutes of surgery, and something in his face shifted. Not fear. Anger. The particular rage of a man who sees his authority being undermined before he even walks into the room. His voice came out like a tank idling in a garage, low, resonant, impossible to ignore. Nurse Ross. The hallway went quiet. The general's family froze in the waiting room doorway. Who authorized you to prep this bay? Pierce stepped closer, his voice rising now, climbing into the registers where it could be heard 3 rooms down. Who gave you permission to touch anything on this patient? Who told you to start lines without a physician present? Danielle didn't move. Her hands remained at her sides, relaxed. Her face was the color of hospital walls, neutral, featureless, giving him nothing to grab. We have nurses here who think they're surgeons, people, Pierce said, his voice echoing down the corridor now, deliberately broadcast, a performance for the residents and attending physicians who had started gathering at the doorway. His face was flushed. Spittle caught the fluorescent light as he spoke. Nurse Nightingale over here, she can't help herself, can she? Can't just monitor a patient, can't just follow orders. Has to be the hero. Has to know better than the physicians. Has to play surgeon. Claire, the general's wife, flinched. Her hand gripped her daughter's arm. Danielle's eyes met Pierce's. Not with defiance. Not with rage. With something worse, clarity. The kind of cold, flat stare that came from having already calculated every possible outcome of this moment and finding them all beneath consideration. She let the silence stretch. Let it build in the space between them like pressure in a sealed chamber. Pierce kept talking, but his voice was wavering now, searching for something to hit that might actually land. She said nothing. That was the blade. The silence. The refusal to give him a response that would justify his outrage. When he finally finished, his words trailing off into technical jargon about protocols and scope of practice, Danielle spoke. Her voice was surgical. Precise. 10 words, no more. You're punishing competence because you're afraid of it. Then she turned. Walked past the instrument tray. took position at the bedside where the general lay with his eyes still closed and his daughter still crying, and began checking his vitals with the focused, methodical attention of someone who had held lives together with her bare hands in places where the concept of protocol didn't exist. Pierce stood in the doorway for 7 seconds. Then he turned and left. The surgery took 4 hours. A vascular surgeon from Presbyterian in Denver had to be called in for the subclavian repair. Pierce was competent but not specialized, and Danielle assisted, her hands moving through the procedure with the fluid precision of someone who had done this before, many times, in operating theaters that didn't exist on any official map. During the 3rd hour, when the abdominal bleeding required a massive transfusion protocol, one of the residents asked her how she knew to have the ONEG units already typed and ready. She didn't answer. She just kept working. By 1100 hours, the general was stable. Sutured. Bandaged. Breathing over the ventilator, his body sedated, his vitals climbing, blood pressure 108/64, heart rate 86, oxygen saturation 97%. The kind of recovery that shouldn't have been possible with those wound patterns, from a man who'd been septic for 36 hours before transport. Pierce watched her clean the instruments. His jaw was clenched. He said nothing. The next morning, the break room smelled like burnt coffee and that particular despair of hospital staff on the tail end of a double shift. Danielle carried her lunch, a container of rice and grilled chicken, the same meal she'd eaten for 6 years, fuel rather than food, and sat at the table where Sarah Chen, Tom Mallory, and Jennifer Rodriguez were finishing their morning rounds. She set the container down, opened the lid, picked up her fork. 3 seconds of silence. Then all 3 of them stood up simultaneously. Sarah grabbed her yogurt. Tom left his half-eaten bagel. Jennifer didn't even pick up her plate. They just left, their chairs scraping back against the tile with a sound like objection, and walked out of the break room without looking at her. The silence that followed was the kind that could be heard in bone marrow. Danielle kept eating. By that afternoon, the unit board had been updated. A written warning, scope of practice violation, insubordination, patient care area preparation without physician authorization. Signed by Dr. Pierce. Dated 0614, 13 minutes after the ambulance arrived. Pinned to the bulletin board in the nurses' station where every employee had to pass it. Where the administration would see it. Where it would be the first thing a disciplinary committee reviewed. Where it became documentation. Pierce walked past her station at 13:47. His eyes found the board, then found her face. He smiled, a small, satisfied expression, the look of a man who had just moved a chess piece and was waiting for her to realize she was already losing. Danielle met his gaze. Held it. Let the moment stretch like that morning's silence. When he finally looked away, his smile faltering, his confidence cracking just slightly at the edges, she turned back to her work without acknowledgement. Not retreat. Not acceptance. Simply a return to something more important. But that afternoon brought the assignment change. She was moved to the general's ICU monitoring rotation. Not because she'd been rewarded. Because Pierce was making sure that every moment she spent with this patient would be documented, witnessed, and available for evidence if she ever stepped out of line again. It was a cage disguised as an opportunity. A surveillance system dressed as a posting. She didn't question it. She clocked in for the evening shift, walked past the warning on the bulletin board, her eyes didn't even flick toward it, and took her place at the bedside of the Navy general from Kandahar, the man she'd been sent to Cedar Creek Medical to protect, the patient whose mission success depended on her absolute invisibility. The general's monitor beeped its steady rhythm. His ventilator wheezed in synchronized breath. His wife had gone home 2 hours earlier, her hand gripping his for the last time before visiting hours ended, her face a study in the particular devastation of people who'd almost lost everything and couldn't quite believe they hadn't. At 19:23, the general's eyes opened. Not fully conscious. Not aware. But open. Tracking. His pupils constricting in the harsh fluorescent light, his body still sedated, his conscious mind still somewhere between Kandahar and the ceiling tiles above his head. Danielle was there. Of course she was there. She'd been there for 6 hours, and she would be there for the next 6. She watched his eyes move across the room, searching, trying to assemble the broken pieces of his last memory, the ambush, the gunfire, the moment the round had entered his chest and changed everything. His eyes found her face. Something shifted in them. Recognition. Or fear. Or the particular relief of seeing something familiar at the edge of a precipice. "You were there," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the ventilator's rhythm. "Kandahar. You were." She squeezed his hand once. Didn't speak. Didn't confirm. Just held the pressure for 3 seconds, then released and returned to her monitoring chart. But there was someone watching through the glass partition of the ICU room. Someone who'd noticed the general's eyes opening, the moment of contact, the small gesture of her hand on his. Someone who was already typing on his phone, already documenting, already building the foundation for what he would need to justify his next move. Dr. Pierce was still writing. The break room smelled like old coffee and regret. Danielle sat down with her lunch, a sandwich she'd made at 4 in the morning, sitting alone in her kitchen, and 3 sets of eyes looked up from the table simultaneously. Marcus Chen from day surgery. Sarah with the blonde ponytail from the ICU. And Dr. Patel, the resident who'd watched Pierce tear into her the day before and done nothing. They stood. All 3 of them. Not slowly. Not gradually. In unison, like they'd rehearsed it. "We're heading back," Marcus said, not meeting her eyes. "Lots to do," Sarah added, her voice thin. Dr. Patel said nothing. Just grabbed her Tupperware and left behind them, the door swinging shut with a soft hiss. Danielle didn't move. She set her sandwich on the table in front of her, unwrapped the paper slowly, and ate in silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped its steady rhythm. A stretcher wheel squeaked past the closed door. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was steady. Inside, she was burning, not with embarrassment, but with the cold, controlled anger of someone who'd learned long ago that showing fire was a luxury she couldn't afford. She finished the sandwich. Drank her coffee. Rinsed her cup in the sink without hurrying. The break room remained empty around her like a vacuum. By afternoon, the unit board had been updated. The board sat at the nurse's station, a white laminate surface where schedules and announcements lived. Danielle saw it when she came back from the medication dispensary, a stack of flushes in her hands. A memo. Letter-sized. Laminated, so it would last. Pinned directly where every staff member would pass it on their way to or from the unit. Written warning for insubordination, it read in Times New Roman. Her name. The date. A bullet point list of violations, failed to follow chain of command. Made clinical decisions without physician authorization. Prepped medical equipment without direct orders. Overstepped professional boundaries. Placed herself in a position of false authority. It was signed by Dr. Pierce, dated 0700 hours, witnessed by the hospital administrator. Danielle stood in front of it for exactly 5 seconds. Long enough to read it twice. Long enough to understand that he wasn't just angry. He was building something. A paper trail. A documented pattern of behavior that would be very difficult to explain away, very easy to weaponize. She was still looking at it when Pierce rounded the corner from his office. He saw her immediately. His pace didn't change. He walked straight toward the board like a man in no hurry at all, and his eyes found hers with the precision of a sniper acquiring a target. She could see it in his face, the satisfaction. The small, tight smile. The way his shoulders sat a little higher. He walked past her. Stopped. Let his gaze linger on the warning memo for a moment, then back to her. His expression was a masterclass in condescension. A smile that said, "I own this. I own you. Everyone knows it now." Danielle's eyes were flat. Cold. Empty of every emotion except the one thing she let show, the absolute absence of fear. She held his stare. Didn't blink. Didn't look away. Let the silence stretch between them like a wire pulled taut. 3 seconds. 5. 7. The kind of silence that makes the nervous system recognize dominance without words. Pierce's smile faltered. Just a millimeter. Just enough. He looked away first. She waited until his shoes carried him past the medication cart, past the EKG station, back toward the surgical wing before she spoke. But it wasn't to his retreating back. She didn't shout it. Didn't call after him. Her voice was soft. Surgical. The kind of quiet that carries further than screaming because everyone has to stop and listen. You're punishing competence because you're afraid of it. The hallway went still. A nurse passing with a blood draw tray paused mid-step. The sound of a printer somewhere in the unit seemed to grow louder by the absence of other noise. Danielle turned without waiting for a response and walked directly back to room 412, where Captain James Holder lay in the ICU bed with a surgical drain in his chest and machines tracking every beat of his heart. The general had survived surgery. The surgeons had stopped the bleeding, repaired the damage, closed him up around 0200 hours. He was stable. Recovering in ICU under close monitoring. The official prognosis was good. 3 weeks, maybe 4, and he'd be transferred to the Naval Hospital in San Diego. Medal of Valor ceremony in the fall. Back to command within 6 months. What the chart didn't say was that Danielle had been positioned here for 8 months specifically for this moment. That the patch sewn into her jacket lining wasn't a memento. It was a cool sign. That the young medic in room 412 had been doing her job in Kandahar province for 2 years before taking shrapnel from an IED, and now he was in recovery, and she was the only person in Cedar Creek Medical who knew that the next 72 hours would determine whether he lived as a whole man or not. She entered the room quietly. The general was asleep, his breathing steady and even, regulated by the mechanical precision of the ventilator. His monitors showed what they should show. O2 sat 98. Heart rate 74. BP stable at 106/67. All green lights. She checked the surgical drains. Fluid output normal. Color normal. No signs of infection. She adjusted the flow rate for the antibiotics, double-checked the medication labels, and was starting to verify the vent settings when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Measured. Deliberate. Coming toward the room. Pierce appeared in the doorway. Ross. Step away from the general. Danielle didn't turn around. She was adjusting the patient's gown, checking the surgical site under the tape. Just verifying post-op parameters, doctor. Everything's stable. I said step away. She did, then, turning to face him. And that was when she saw it. The way his eyes moved past her to the monitors. The way his hand held a file. The way his shoulders were set with the kind of anticipation that meant he wasn't checking on the patient. He was checking on his narrative. Reassign the general to post-op overflow, he said to the nurse who appeared behind him in the doorway. Sarah, you take him. Ross, you're with psych now. Overflow beds need monitoring. Sir, I'm his primary care assignment. I've been managing his. Are you refusing an order? The room went still. Danielle could feel it in the air now. The moment before something breaks. The moment before you have to choose between the mission and yourself. Between the protocol and the patient. Between the carefully constructed identity and the thing you actually are. She looked at Pierce. Looked at the general's monitor showing perfect vitals. Looked at the file in Pierce's hand, probably another incident report, another documented violation, another brick in the wall he was building around her career. No, sir, she said. Her voice was quiet. Obedient. Smaller than it should be. She stepped away from the bed. Sarah moved in with the efficient movements of a competent nurse who'd never been to Kandahar, never held a dying soldier's hand, never made the kinds of decisions that got classified. Sarah was good. Sarah was just not trained for what was coming. And what was coming was going to be bad. Danielle walked toward the psych overflow, located 2 corridors down in what everyone called the quiet zone. 6 beds for psychiatric holds and overflow patients. Mostly stable, mostly asleep, mostly not requiring the kind of moment-to-moment intervention that a recovering general needed after 7 bullet wounds. She sat at the station and pulled up the psych charts. Ran through vitals. Checked medication times. Did everything a good nurse does when she's being watched and she knows it. But her eyes kept tracking toward the monitors. The wireless feed to room for 12 was visible from this angle if you knew where to look, displayed on a secondary screen meant for the attending physician to check in remotely. She could see the numbers. Oxygen sat 98. Heart rate steady. BP holding at 106. She waited. At 2,147 hours, the numbers changed. BP dropped to 104. A small change. The kind a casual observer wouldn't notice. The kind that meant internal bleeding starting again. Slow. Deliberate. The body finding new spaces for blood to go. Danielle stood. Walked to the medication dispensary. Restocked her cart. Acted like nothing had happened while her mind was already calculating volumes and pressure and the exact moment the general's body would compensate too hard and crash. By 22:03 hours, the BP had dropped to 98. Heart rate climbing. 102. 108. 114. Sarah would notice in minutes. Maybe 3. Maybe 5 if she was distracted. Danielle thought about the patch in her jacket. Thought about the kid in that bed who'd taken her place in Kandahar. Thought about 8 months of preparation, 2 years of planning, and what it meant to walk away now. She walked toward room for 12. The monitor screen cut through the hallway at 0:02 hours. Danielle was 3 floors away, reviewing charts in the break room when her pager buzzed, not the standard alert tone, but the one that meant exsanguination, that meant minutes, that meant now. She was moving before her brain caught up, muscle memory from Kandahar taking over, her legs carrying her toward the stairwell while her hands were already scrubbing mentally, already preparing for what her gut was telling her before the official page came through. Room for 12. The general. The one she wasn't supposed to monitor anymore. Pierce had reassigned her that morning. A memo. See sit to 3 department heads. Language about conflict of interest and overstepping boundaries and maintaining professional distance. She'd read it with the same flat expression she wore through everything, no trembling, no indignation, just the slight tightening in her jaw that nobody ever noticed. 8 months of preparation. 2 years of planning. The mission code name Nightingale Actual, embedded so deep that pulling out meant burning it all down, every asset, every contact, every thread of the operation unraveling back through Colorado Springs, back through the Pentagon, back through Kandahar province where she'd held the perimeter with 17 wounded Marines bleeding out behind her. She'd walk toward room for 12 anyway, because that's what you do when the math doesn't work any other way. Now the math was screaming. The doors to the ICU burst open, not because she pushed them hard, but because she was moving like something with a single target locked in, and the air got out of her way. Room for 12 was 2 doors down. She could already hear the monitor's cadence, the frantic high-pitched wail that meant blood pressure bottoming out. Systolic dropping. Diastolic vanishing. The general's chest rising and falling with mechanical precision because the ventilator didn't know he was dying. She was through the door before the new nurse, something Martinez, fresh out of nursing school, still had that soft fear in her movements, could even step back. Pressure. Danielle didn't ask. The monitor answered, 60/40 and still falling. He's bleeding internally. Get me a crash cart. Now. Martinez froze. Actually froze. Her hands locked. Her eyes went to the door like the answer was out there somewhere in the hallway. Dr. Pierce said we're not supposed to. Do it or he dies. Not a shout. Not even raised. Just the voice of someone who had already made the math work once and wasn't going to let bureaucracy rewrite the equation. Move. The crash cart clattered in 15 seconds later, the wheels squeaking against linoleum like a bird with a broken wing. Danielle was already gloving up, already assessing, already seeing the anatomy the way she'd been trained to see it, not as a nurse but as a field medic who'd stood in the dirt of Helmand Province and made life-or-death decisions with the sound of rotors in the distance and Taliban gunfire 200 meters out. She grabbed the scalpel from the crash cart. Not a surgical instrument. A field-expedient blade. The kind you use when there's no time for prep rooms and sterile fields and the permission of people who've never held a life in their hands while it was actively leaving. "I need retraction," she said to Martinez. "Hand me a bovie when I ask. And don't look away." The scalpel was cold. Stainless steel against her gloved palm. She found the 5th intercostal space, counting down from the nipple line, muscle memory painting the anatomy over the general's pale chest, and the blade went in with surgical precision, left anterolateral thoracotomy, the kind of cut you make when there's 2 minutes before the body shuts down and doesn't ask for your credentials. Blood. So much blood. It was supposed to be inside, contained, doing its job. Instead it was everywhere, dark and arterial, pumping out in rhythm with a heart that was losing the race. The rib spreader went in. Clicked. Opened the chest like a book. And there it was, the bleeder, the subclavian artery severed where the bullet had done its work 6 days ago. The trauma surgery had missed it or it had eroded slowly, and now the general was pooling out into his thoracic cavity at a rate that made the math simple, 3 minutes before cardiac arrest. Danielle's hands moved like they were separate from her body. Vascular clamp. The satin sky was in her hand before she asked for it. She clamped the bleeder, felt the resistance, the small surrender of the bleeding vessel, the way it went slack once the pressure changed. Suction. The field cleared. She could see now, see the damage, see what needed holding together. The door exploded open. Dr. Pierce stood in the frame like a man who'd just watched his kingdom catch fire. His face was already moving from confusion to rage, the color rising in his neck like a thermometer filled with anger. The other nurses, Martinez and 2 others who'd been standing frozen in the doorway, scattered like they'd been shocked with 200 jowls. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Pierce's voice was a weapon, loud enough to echo down the hallway, loud enough that people 3 rooms over probably heard his shock and his fury and his absolute certainty that Danielle was about to have her license burned in front of her face. The general's pressure was climbing. 70/50. Not good. But climbing. Danielle didn't look up. Her hands were still moving, her focus still locked on the operative field, on the bleeder that was still trying to fight her, on the surgical precision that had kept 17 Marines alive on a hillside in Kandahar when there was nobody else and nothing else, just her hands and the knowledge that if she stopped concentrating for 1 second, they would all die. "Get me 2 units of ONEG," she said to no one. The air around her had changed. The room had changed. There was no arguing with the voice she was using. There was only compliance or chaos. "Martinez, call the OR. Tell them we have a live bleeder on an open thoracotomy and we're moving to the table in 5. No delays." Pierce was still shouting. "That's practicing medicine without a license, that's patient endangerment, that's gross insubordination." The general's pressure climbed another mark. 75/52. Breathing. Holding. The bleeder was clamped, was staying clamped, was bleeding out into a pool while his actual blood, his real blood, stayed inside his body where it belonged. Danielle applied a temporary suture with hands that had done this in the field with thread scavenged from a medical kit under fire. 3 stitches. Enough to hold. She looked up at Pierce for the first time. Her eyes were a color that made the air in the room feel colder. "He's stable. OR now." She turned to Martinez. "Call transport. Tell them priority critical, thoracic alert." Then back to Pierce, and her voice dropped to something that sounded like wind moving across winter ground. "You can write all the reports you want after we save his life." It wasn't a request. It was a command. Pierce's face flushed deeper, his hands clenching, his jaw working like he was chewing through something that tasted like his own authority crumbling in real time. He turned and walked out of the room, pulling his phone from his pocket before he hit the hallway. Danielle could hear him before he made it 10 steps away. HR? Yeah, this is Dr. Pierce. I need to file an immediate report for patient endangerment, practicing medicine without a license, insubordination, and gross violation of protocol. I have 3 witnesses and a full documentation trail. The general was sutured, stable, moving to the OR when Pierce was still on the phone in the hallway, still listing charges like he was building a case for war crimes tribunal. By the time the surgical team took over, a real surgeon, a real OR, real protocols and permission structures, Danielle had peeled off her gloves and watched them wheel the bed out of room for 12. The general's eyes opened for just a moment. He was still sedated, still half-conscious, but his eyes found hers and held them. Recognition. The smallest nod. She nodded back. Then turned and walked out of the room. The locker room was empty when she got there. 2 hours had passed. The surgery had taken 45 minutes. The bleeding was stopped, the vessel was repaired, the general was sleeping in recovery while monitors tracked the heartbeat of a man who should have been dead. And Danielle's locker, when she opened it, held a single white envelope. Termination letter. Effective immediately. Patient endangerment. Protocol violations. Practicing medicine without a license. Insubordination. Gross misconduct. A list of charges that sounded like a military court-martial transcript. The signature was on the bottom: Dr. Gerald Pierce, Emergency Director, Cedar Creek Medical, authorized by hospital administration. Her badge was already gone. Security had deactivated it before she even left the building. She'd swiped it on the way out and it had beeped red, the light turning from green to red like a switch flipping from alive to dead. A security guard had appeared at her shoulder with an awkward expression and a plastic bag. You can take personal effects only. I need to walk you to your car. She'd smiled at him. Just smiled. No anger. No tears. No trembling. Just the smile of someone who'd already survived worse. Of course. The parking lot was dark. It was 2,300 hours. The general was stable. His vessel was clamped. His life was his own again. And Danielle Ross's entire 8-month intelligence operation was burning, the mission code name scattered across incident reports, the cover blown into pieces the moment she'd picked up that scalpel and made the choice that mattered. At 3:41 a.m., she sat in Angie's all-night diner on the eastern edge of Colorado Springs, coffee gone cold in a white ceramic cup, staring at her own reflection in the black window. The street was empty. The highway beyond was a ribbon of nothing. She could see her own face, gaunt, older than it should have been, marked with the weight of decisions that didn't come with permission slips or appeals processes. She'd saved him. And she'd lost everything. And the worst part was she couldn't tell anyone why. 3 in the morning, and the diner was the kind of place where time stopped moving. Danielle sat in a corner booth, her coffee gone cold an hour ago, the mug still clutched between her palms like it might anchor her to something real. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical song above her head. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for rain hammering the asphalt like applause for a performance no one was watching. She stared at her reflection in the black window, hollow-eyed, uniform still on because she hadn't even gone home. Just driven. Found this place. Ordered coffee she didn't drink. The face looking back at her wasn't the one who'd performed a field thoracotomy with a scalpel from a crash cart. Wasn't the one who'd saved a 3-star general's life while Dr. Pierce was still trying to understand what was happening. That woman was competent. That woman had steady hands and surgical precision and 6 years of combat medicine under her belt. This woman was unemployed. Fired. Badge deactivated before her feet touched the parking lot. Terminated for patient endangerment, practicing medicine without a license, protocol violations, all of it technically accurate, all of it meaningless. She couldn't explain why she'd been placed at Cedar Creek Medical. Couldn't say the word intelligence operation or classified. Couldn't tell anyone that monitoring the general was her real job, that the nursing credential was just the cover, that blowing her identity meant mission failure and months of deep work burned to ash. She had orders. She had a clearance. She had a job that required her to sit quiet in a hospital and watch, and she'd done it perfectly until the moment she couldn't anymore. Until keeping her cover meant letting a man bleed to death. And then she'd made the only choice that made sense, and it had cost her everything. The rain kept hammering. Danielle didn't move. Sunrise came grey and wet. She made it back to Cedar Creek Medical's parking lot around 6 in the morning, partly because she needed something, and partly because she had nowhere else to be. The lot was quiet, shift change still an hour away, just a handful of early arrivals pulling in. She was sitting in her car, engine off, staring at the hospital entrance, when she heard the footsteps. Fast. Getting faster. Her tactical instincts fired before her conscious mind caught up. Her hand went to the door, but then she heard the voice. Mom. Marcus was sprinting across the asphalt like his life depended on it, his 14-year-old legs eating up the distance, his breathing ragged. He was clutching something, a shadow box, ornate wood frame, glass front. Even from 20 feet away she could see the ribbons. The medals. Marcus, what are you? Danielle stepped out of the car, her voice still deferential, still apologetic, still the version of herself that didn't belong here. They fired you for saving someone, they need to see these. He was loud. Not angry loud, but the kind of volume that carries across a parking lot, that makes two orderlies in the distance turn to look. They need to know what you actually are. She reached for him, but Marcus was already moving toward the ER doors, the shadow box held in front of him like evidence. Like proof. She followed because her legs moved before her mind could argue, and then they were through the double doors, the antiseptic smell hitting her like a wall, and Marcus was heading straight for the ICU, straight for the general's room where Dr. Pierce was conducting rounds with the hospital board. The room went very quiet when a 14-year-old kid in a rain-soaked hoodie walked in holding a shadow box of military medals. The general's eyes opened. He'd been stable for 18 hours, recovery trajectory textbook perfect. But his focus sharpened when he saw her face, and he whispered something that made everyone in the room freeze. Reaper 6. The code name. The operation name. The identity that was supposed to stay buried. A Marine colonel in dress blue stepped forward. Danielle's stomach dropped because she recognized him, Clayton Mercer. She'd served under him in Kandahar, and he was holding the shadow box from Marcus's trembling hands, and he was reading aloud in that ceremonial voice that military men use for sacred things. Captain Danielle Ross. For extraordinary heroism under fire in Kandahar province. Silver Star. He paused. The room was silent except for the ventilator's mechanical wheeze. For exceptional bravery in combat operations, direct fire engagement, and treatment of casualties under active enemy fire. A 3-star Admiral stepped forward. Danielle didn't recognize her, but the woman moved with the kind of authority that makes rooms smaller. The Admiral saluted the rows of ribbons, Bronze Star, Purple Heart again, Silver Star, and beneath them all a smaller medal Danielle had never expected to see outside a classified briefing room. The Admiral's eyes met hers for one fraction of a second, and that was all the acknowledgement Danielle needed. Dr. Pierce tried to interrupt. His voice was shrill, pitched high with the kind of panic that comes from losing control. This is a patient care area, this is highly irregular, you can't just, this is completely inappropriate protocol. But the Admiral raised one hand. Just one hand. And Dr. Pierce's voice cut off like a switch. Sit down, Doctor. The silence that followed was so thick you could operate in it. Every nurse in the hallway had heard. Every orderly. Every person standing in that room understood that Dr. Pierce had just tried to order around the medical command structure of the United States Navy, and he'd lost before his mouth finished moving. The Admiral turned to Danielle, and something in her expression, something that suggested she'd read every classified report, every mission file, every encrypted briefing, made Danielle's spine straighten. We have your clearance restoration paperwork. The Admiral's voice was granite. We have your operational mandate. We have Director Harmon's full briefing on Project Reaper 6, and we have documentation that your cover was necessary and your actions were authorized. She glanced at the two Pentagon officials who'd just walked through the door, and they stepped forward holding printed orders, letters with official seals, and the full operational code name of the mission Danielle had been running undercover. Pierce opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. I was simply following protocol. I had no way of knowing she was. You knew, the Admiral said quietly. You knew something was wrong about her credentials. You knew her background didn't match her competence. And instead of asking questions, you decided to destroy her. What happened next came in fragments. Hospital IT was in the room. Jerry, the IT director, 50 years old with a 101st Airborne tattoo visible on his forearm. He was holding a hard drive. His voice was calm and measured, the voice of a man who'd seen combat and recognized competence when it saved lives. Dr. Pierce, you accessed the security server at midnight last night. Jerry held up the hard drive. You attempted to delete footage from the trauma bay. The footage of Captain Ross performing an emergency thoracotomy on a Navy general with a field knife and equipment that wasn't rated for the procedure, and that general is alive because of her intervention. I preserve everything. Jerry stepped closer to the Admiral, and his voice carried the kind of authority that comes from knowing exactly what you saw. Every frame. I watched her work. I know a hero when I see one. And I reported you to the State Medical Board this morning, sir. Tampering with evidence. Falsifying records. Attempted destruction of medical documentation. The room went absolutely silent. Pierce's hands were shaking. His face had gone the color of old hospital walls. I was reviewing the incident for my report. I didn't delete anything. This is a misunderstanding. The board director stood up. His face had hardened into something that looked like contempt. Dr. Pierce, you're suspended pending investigation, effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building. It took 3 minutes. 2 security officers, 1 walk of shame down a hallway where every single nurse watched him pass. The same hallway where they'd heard him call her Nurse Nightingale like an insult. Now they understood what it meant. Now they knew she'd earned it in places they couldn't imagine. 6 months later, Danielle heard through the grapevine that Pierce was teaching CPR classes at a community college in Denver for $15 an hour. His medical license was under review. No hospital would touch him. She felt nothing when she heard it. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the clean emptiness of a closed chapter. She was back at Cedar Creek Medical, working ER again. But now everyone knew. The general had recovered completely, had sent her a handwritten letter thanking Reaper 6 for saving him twice, once in Kandahar, once in Colorado. The young medic who'd replaced her in theater, the one with the shrapnel wounds, had written back, and the network of people who understood what she'd done spread like quiet recognition through the hospital. Marcus asked her if it was worth it. Losing the cover. Ending the mission. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she went to her locker, reached into the jacket lining, and pulled out the faded unit patch. 6th Battalion, Naval Special Warfare. She'd kept it sewn there through every shift, a secret stitched into fabric only she could feel. She walked to the nurses' station during shift change when everyone was there. No announcement. No ceremony. Just took the patch and pinned it to the bulletin board where it belonged, where every nurse could see it, where it would stay. One of the younger nurses, fresh out of school, asked what it meant. Danielle didn't smile. Didn't explain. Just said in a voice that had dropped an octave since the day she'd been fired, "It means I did my job." Both of them. She turned back to her patient board. Checked the trauma bay supplies. Made sure everything was ready for the next emergency, the next moment when she'd have to be ready to move, to act, to save someone. Her hands didn't shake anymore. The reflection in the monitor wasn't hollow. She spoke to no one in particular, her voice quiet but carrying like radio static across open water. Power is not a title. Power is the ability to help. Then she got back to work. If this story hit you, if you've ever been underestimated, ever kept quiet while someone tried to destroy you, or subscribe to this channel. Like this video. Comment with the bravest quiet thing you've ever done. Because the world needs to know that heroes don't always look like heroes. Sometimes they wear scrubs. Sometimes they save lives in the dark where no one's watching.